In a speech to high-powered donors last night, former President Trump again harped on the big lie that the 2020 election wasn't free and fair and secure, and that his second term was stolen from him. State Republicans nationwide have used that lie as the basis for new laws making it harder to vote. In Texas, one such bill is poised to become law. Republicans there are defending the measure. Here's Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick this week.
Nothing has changed in the election code regarding early voting. Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed for mail-in ballots, election day, or early voting. And anyone who says different is lying to you.
Okay, that is false. We're not lying to you. This law would limit early voting hours from what they were before. It would ban drop boxes and it would prohibit drive-through voting, which was used in early voting last year. I'm joined now by the author of this bill, Texas State Senator Bryan Hughes. Nice to have you on.
Thank you for having me.
So this bill bans drop boxes and drive-through voting, two methods that make it easier to vote and were widely used in Harris County, a huge county with around 2.7 million registered voters. Why are Texas lawmakers like yourself taking away methods of voting that make it easier to vote?
Drop boxes, drive-through voting, 24-hour voting, not in the Texas election code, never been even discussed. One county in one election tried that, and the results are not so good. They tell us now they're not sure all the votes got counted. We have evidence from drive-through voting that no folks didn't have a secret ballot, machines being passed around in the car, no poll watchers, no security. And so the safest, most secure way to vote is in the polling place with protections in place. We make accommodations for folks who have a disability. We'll bring the machine out to them. And, of course, mail ballots for 65 or over, overseas or disabled folks. But beyond that, we like voting in the polling place. And even after Senate Bill 7, as you know, we'll have much more expansive early voting and mail requirements than many states, many blue states for that matter.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this. First of all, in terms of the poll watchers at these drive-through locations, they are supposed to be there. They are supposed to have the same security as a polling location where you would go to vote. And you say drive-through voting has never been allowed in Texas, but that's not true. I mean, the Texas code stipulates early voting is allowed within movable structures. The Texas election code does not explicitly outlaw drive-through polling locations. Plus, a federal judge, a conservative judge, ruled that drive-through voting was legally permissible in Texas for early voting based on that code. So why ban something that the most populous county used successfully and securely in 2020 and a court allowed? Why are you laughing? Why not set conditions for it to be available throughout the state instead?
Oh, I'm not laughing. I'm listening to what you're saying. I want to respond appropriately because that's not exactly what happened. The election code does not provide for drive-through voting. I was on an interview with one of my Democratic colleagues today in Dallas,
it allows for certain structures for early voting, and the judge said that the drive-through voting would be a structure. And this is a conservative judge. But go ahead. I don't want to get too in the weeds on this.
No, thank you very much. The federal judge that looked at these measures Harris County took said that the plaintiffs that brought the suit lacked standing. And so he couldn't rule. But if he could, he would have a problem with them. That was Judge Haynen in the Southern District of Texas. That's correct. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And so I want to be clear on that. So drive-through voting had never been discussed, never been done in Texas. Even the folks in Harris County will admit this was the first time it had happened. The legislature sets election day and sets policy. Harris County is not the capital, and local officials can't make up the rules as they go along. I might like what they do. I may not like it. But in our system, the legislature makes the laws, and the local governments have to follow them. And again, drive-through voting was not successful. The numbers didn't line up. There was no secret ballot in many cases. There's some real problems with it.
Okay, so let's talk about this, because by your standard, look, Governor Abbott limited drop boxes in 2020, which was not explicitly in the law, and the courts upheld that. So you have that. But also, look, the local election administrators were interpreting the law and what to do with it during a pandemic, and that is why in Harris County in particular, they came up with these measures. Here's what one of the administrators said to CNN earlier today about this, why they decided to put these methods into place.
The idea came because if you can do groceries drive-through, if you can do banking drive-through, why can't you do that in-person voting drive-through? 127,000 people used that in November, and we used it in July of last year. We used it in December of last year. We're going to use it May of this year. It's something that is working, that voters like, and it's being taken away without explanation.
So why take power away from local election officials to decide how best to administer elections in their area?
I'm not questioning their motives. They say that it was for COVID-19. I'll take their word for it. The legislature sets the law for the whole state. Locals follow that law. Picking up groceries and going to the bank is not quite as important as voting. Secret ballot matters to us in Texas. If you're jammed in a car with someone looking over your shoulder, you're not casting a secret ballot. Also, testimony was that poll watchers weren't there to make sure the rules were being followed.
But
I was on a call with one of my Democratic colleagues, and he admitted drive-through voting is not done in Texas.
Okay. But really quick, if secret voting, secret ballots are so important, why is Texas, under this bill, allowing poll watchers to use their own discretion and decide to videotape someone filling out a ballot if they're getting assistance? Doesn't that undercut that argument?
We had testimony from Democrats, a prosecutor in the Rio Grande Valley, failed Democratic candidates who talked about cheating. They told us folks come in and claim to be helping voters, but in fact, they're intimidating them and forcing their will on them. Voters came to us after the fact and complained. That provision is to make sure voters are casting their ballots, not being influenced by someone else. And
but
again,
they could be intimidated by the poll watchers. Do you concede that that could happen if they're being videotaped by poll watchers, which is, I believe, unprecedented?
The poll watchers aren't there to tell them how to vote, nor can they. Poll watchers are the eyes and ears of the public.
Yeah, but they're videotaping them.
Democrats.
They're videotaping them under this bill.
The poll watchers are allowed to videotape what's going on in the process. They cannot share that. They can only release it to the Secretary of State if there's reasonable belief it violates the law. Poll watchers are there from the Republican Party, Democratic Party, all candidates. They're the eyes and ears of the public. We've had cases in Texas where the poll watcher says this irregularity took place. The election worker says no. That video evidence, like a police body cam, will show us what really happened. That's the idea. It's about having evidence so we know what's going on.
That's why they fill out affidavits for what's going on, which would be used in court. Video evidence could go viral. It could get out, and you could misconstrue it. People could be intimidated by that. Do you see that argument?
There are poll watchers there from both sides. If one poll watcher is trying to intimidate voters, the other party can expose them. Remember, poll watchers are there from all parties, from multiple candidates. We're not talking about just Democrats or just Republicans. Poll watchers are the eyes and ears of the public. And this is not a new concept. This has been this way for a while.
That is true, but what is a new concept is allowing them to videotape voters while they're filling out their ballots with assistance. But I want to ask you, because the underpinning of this, and I was reading through the bill as it is earlier, and it's all founded on this idea of preventing fraud. It says this was enacted solely to prevent fraud in the electoral process. But the Texas Attorney General's office put 22,000 hours into trying to dig up voter fraud in Texas and only found 16 minor cases out of 11 million votes. That is statistically insignificant. To what end does a state that already has some of the strictest voting laws on the books put restrictions in place on voting in the name of voter fraud when the instances of fraud are statistically insignificant and you risk disenfranchising voters who have a constitutionally protected right to vote?
There are over 400 open cases of investigations of voter fraud by the Attorney General right now because of COVID-19 protocols. Courts were not open last year.
The 2020 election, there were 16 minor people filling out wrong addresses. How does that justify taking away access to voting?
There are over 400 open cases. Let me give you some details in the 2018 election cycle. Please remember, our legislature meets every 2 years. We meet odd-numbered years. So when problems come up, we try to deal with them. In 2017, the legislature passed Senate Bill 5, a mail ballot reform bill, passed with bipartisan support. In 2019, our next session, I filed Senate Bill 9. Passed the Senate, did not pass the House. These same issues. And here we are again.
I'm talking about voter fraud. This is about the 2020 election and what you're trying to do with this bill.
So I understand you want to talk about the national debate and about Georgia. This is about Texas and Texas elections. We had Democrats testify under oath about cheating with mail ballots, with people claiming to offer assistance. We are responding to what Democrats told us under oath in front of the Senate committee. Prosecutors,
are you really saying that
this
bill is predicated on what Democrats had testified to? Democrats have come out and said that it will disproportionately hurt minorities in Texas because more than half of those voting at those drive-through locations were minorities, according to one Democratic lawmaker. So what evidence? I'm still not hearing evidence from you on why these voting methods are insecure or are unsecure, I should say, or where you see the fraud in these voting methods. Can you show us anything?
When I tell you, I certainly can. When I say Democrats, I don't mean the politicians repeating talking points from Washington. I mean on the ground, prosecutor I'm talking about, law enforcement, failed candidates. In my district, let me give you an example. In my district, in East Texas, I have a county commissioner under criminal indictment with some other folks for mail ballot fraud. Now, this is a Democratic county commissioner. The complaint was brought by a Democrat. They happen to both be African American. This is not about race or about party. These rules apply to everyone. When we have sworn testimony, yes, they are. When we have sworn testimony before the legislature, there's a problem. We try to address those problems. In 17, in 19, and this year, I understand there's this national debate, and I'm not part of that. This is about making the system in Texas better for everyone. We heard the same objections with voter ID 10 years ago, and y'all told us.
To what end do you use a statistically insignificant number of voter fraud cases, in this case 16 minor cases in Texas after 22,000 hours? To what end do you use that as justification for a bill that even American Airlines has come out with its statement saying makes it harder to vote, saying that we believe we should break down barriers to diversity, equity, and inclusion in our society, not create them? What do you say to that?
As far as this bill goes, and as far as the number of investigations going on, you're relying on one story before the process is over. There's over 400 open cases of voter fraud in Texas by the AG today. That's a fact. It's documented. There's no question about that.
Why did the Secretary of State say the 2020 election was secure and smooth then? Why did they say that if there's all this concern to justify this bill?
Election fraud didn't start in 2020. It's not going to end. It's a process Texas and other states have dealt with for a long time. When we go to other areas of the law and try to clean it up, we don't get these objections. This is part of a political discussion out of Washington. What we're trying to do is make Texas law better for everyone. With voter ID, we heard the same thing.
But do you really make it better for everyone?
We were told. Yes, we do. We do. And let me tell you why. With voter ID, we were told if you require photo ID, you're going to discourage voters, you're going to depress turnout. What happened? We put in voter ID and turnout increased because when people know the system is fair, know their vote's going to count and count right, they're encouraged to turn out. That's what we want. This idea about turnout, Republicans have done well in turnout elections in Texas. In 2020, if you want to talk about 2020, President Trump won Texas. We held the legislature, held every seat in Congress. This is not something we're concerned about. That's exactly right. So this is an ongoing process to clean up the elections, and we want to make it fair for everyone.
Are you going to do this after every election to keep putting bills on the table to put more restrictions in place in the name of voter fraud when the examples that I looked through today are statistically insignificant? Like I said, the 16 were about people putting wrong addresses on their applications or ballot.
I understand
and by the
those
way,
examples.
No one, I think, wants fraud. I don't think anyone wants fraud. People want to have confidence in their vote. But I'm taking it from the Texas Secretary of State's office that said that this election was secure. The 2020 election was secure and smooth in the state of Texas. So why is there this bill with these measures that many activists say makes it harder to vote and will impose more restrictions and has poll watchers videotaping people at the polls?
You're relying on one article with a political slant to it that talks about a certain number of cases. I'm telling you, there are 400 open cases. And let's go back and look at the 2020 election. Let's go back and look. This is not about 2020. This is about making the process better.
I know, but I'm not just saying this for one article. I want to make sure our viewers know that. I'm citing the Secretary of State and the Attorney General's office, Ken Paxton's office, and what they have uncovered. But go ahead.
I'm referring to your statistics about the number of cases and the number of hours. That's one article. It's out of context. There are over 400 open cases. Here's what I'm saying. When Democrats and Republicans come to us, when Democrats and Republicans come to us and testify under oath, here are the problems. Here's how people are cheating. Here's how this election was affected. We respond. We're talking about prosecutors. We're talking about failed candidates on the Democratic side and on the Republican side. As far as American Airlines goes, that's a good Texas company. They made some general statements about voting. We agree voting's important. We want every vote to count accurately. Very few statements I saw from companies referred specifically to Senate Bill 7. And when they did, they couldn't name a specific concern, just these vague generalizations coming out of Washington. I didn't see a specific concern about the bill. I'd love to talk to them. If anybody has concerns, I'm going to listen. This bill has changed through the process.
Well, I can tell you, they said we are strongly opposed to this bill. And as you well know, the concerns are taking away these voting methods that made it easier to vote, which would include drop boxes. Go ahead.
Since you have the statement, what's the specific provision in American Airlines statement?
They did not say They did not
I didn't
give.
think
They
they
just
did.
said we're strongly opposed to this bill and others like it. But I will tell you, and you well know this, they don't have to lay it out because you know what the issues are. You know that banning drop boxes, banning drive-through voting, and the legislature has the right to change these laws. But this is the job of journalists to scrutinize things like this. So those are the two issues: the drive-through voting, the blocking. Hold on, the banning the drop boxes, and allowing poll watchers to videotape people while they're filling out their ballots. Those are some of the most concerning measures.
Right. So drop boxes hadn't been done before in Texas. We believe it's not a radical concept that ballot should be handed to a live person, not sitting overnight. Who knows who has access to it, has control over it. Ballots, if they're turned in, should be handed to a live person. That's not a new concept in Texas. As far as American Airlines and these companies go, we're going to listen to them. If they have concerns, we listen to groups on the left and the right, citizens, companies, whoever has concerns. But ultimately, if these companies don't like policies in Texas, I hear there's plenty of vacancies in California.
So are you okay with American Airlines and moving to California in that case?
They can make their decision based on Texas being the 9th largest economy in the world, with a great workforce, with great
I'm kidding.
jobs
There's no indication they're going to leave. But are you willing to make more changes to this bill? Are you willing to push for other changes depending on what these corporations say, like American Airlines?
We listened to everyone. After the bill was filed, we made changes. After committee, we made changes. On the floor, we made changes. It's a process. And when we have a hearing and people testify, we listen to them. When other legislators have concerns, we listen to them. The bills change as they go along. They get better. And we like that process. It works.
You did make changes, one for people with disability not having to get a doctor's note anymore. So there have been some changes you've made to this bill. Texas State Senator Bryan Hughes, appreciate that lively discussion. We'll be right back.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much. Thank you.